So some of you have asked for sources, and some of you have rudely asked for sources, and some of you are just rude. So I told the story of Bishop Warren Snow castrating a young man so that he could take his girlfriend. I first heard the story from John D. Lee in his book Mormonism Unveiled. He tells the story on page 285, and that's essentially what I'm quoting in my video. However, this story is well documented in other places. For example, another source comes from Brigham Young's wife, Annalisa Young, in her book Wife Number 19. And it's on pages 280 and 281.
Among the victims to priestly hatred and jealousy was a young man about 20 years of age in San Pete County named Thomas Lewis, a very quiet, inoffensive fellow, much liked by all who knew him, very retiring in his manners, and not particularly fond of gay society. He lived with his widowed mother, and the very sweetest, tenderest relations that can exist between a mother and a child existed between them. Contrary to his usual habit, he attended a dancing party one evening at the urgent and repeated entreaties of his friends, and during the evening he was quite attentive to a young lady friend of his who was present, and with whom he was on terms of greater intimacy than any other in the company. She knew his shy, retiring disposition, and seemed to take pleasure in assisting him to make the evening a pleasant one, just as any good-natured, kindly girl would do for a young fellow whom she likes, and who she knows is ill at ease and uncomfortable. It happened that Snow, the bishop of the ward in which the Lewis family lived, had cast his patriarchal eye on the young girl and designed her for himself, and he did not relish the idea of seeing another person pay attention to his future wife. He had a large family already, but he wished to add to it, and he did not choose to be interfered with. Lewis's doom was sealed at once. The bewitched bishop was mad with jealous rage, and he had only to give a hint of his feelings to some of his chosen followers, who were always about, and the sequel was sure. He denounced Lewis in the most emphatic manner, and really succeeded in arousing quite a strong feeling of indignation against him, for his presumption in daring to pay even the slightest attention to a lady who was destined to grace a bishop's harem. The closest espionage was kept upon him by the bishop's band of ruffians, and one evening a favorable opportunity presented itself. He was waylaid, and the bishop's sentence carried out, which was to inflict on the boy an injury so brutal and barbarous that no woman's pen may write the words that describe it. He lay in a concealed spot for 24 hours, weak and ill and unable to move. Here his brother found him in an apparently dying state. He took him home to his poor, distracted mother, who nursed him with a breaking heart, until after a long time he was partially recovered. He then withdrew himself from all his former friends, and even refused to resume his place at the table with the family. He became a victim of melancholia, and would take no notice of what was occurring around him. He stayed with his mother for several years, when he suddenly disappeared, and has never been heard of since. His mother and brother made every effort to find him, but they could not obtain the slightest clue of his whereabouts. Whether this victim of priestly rule is dead or living must forever remain a mystery. It is probable that the emissaries of Bishop Snow have put an end to his existence. Yet during the whole of this affair, the bishop was sustained by Brigham Young, who knew all about it. He has held his sacred office as securely as though the stain of human blood was not on his conscience. He has been sent on a mission to preach the everlasting gospel of Jesus Christ to the poor benighted nations of Christendom, and he has also taken more wives, which were sealed to him by Brigham Young in the endowment house. But a still greater marvel is that the mother of Bishop Snow's poor victim still retains her faith in Mormonism, and since the cruel and disgraceful tragedy which deprived her of her son, has been sealed to Brigham Young as one of his wives. It was not pity that moved him to marry her, nor a desire to comfort her and lighten her burdens, but it was because he saw, by so doing, he could advance his own interests.
And we see this story again in the book Rocky Mountain Saints by T.B. Stenhouse, and that's on page 302.
I was at a Sunday meeting in the spring of 1857 in Provo when the news of the San Pete castration was referred to by the presiding bishop, Blackburn. Some men in Provo had rebelled against authority in some trivial matter, and Blackburn shouted in the Sunday meeting, a mixed congregation of all ages and both sexes, "I want the people of Provo to understand that the boys in Provo can use the knife as well as the boys in San Pete. Boys, get your knives ready. There is work for you. We must not be behind San Pete in good works."
Ew. This story is even told in Wilford Woodruff's journal, and that's in the entry for June 2nd of 1857.
June 2nd. I spent the day in the office. President Young called in the afternoon. Bishop Blackburn was present. The subject came up of some persons leaving Provo who had apostatized. Some thought that Bishop Blackburn and President Snow were to blame. President Joseph Young presented the thing to President Young. But when the circumstances were told, President Brigham Young sustained the brethren who presided at Provo. He said that they had done right. The subject of eunuchs came up, and Joseph said that he would rather die than be made a eunuch. Brigham Young said the day would come when thousands would be made eunuchs, in order for them to be saved in the kingdom of God.
And there are a few Mormon historians that I trust more than D. Michael Quinn, who told this story in his book, The Mormon Hierarchy, Extensions of Power, and that was on pages 250 and 251.
In the midsummer of 1857, Brigham Young also expressed approval of an LDS bishop who had castrated a man. In May of 1857, Bishop Warren S. Snow's counselors wrote that 24-year-old Thomas Lewis has now gone crazy after being castrated by Bishop Snow for an undisclosed sex crime. When informed of Snow's actions, Young said, "I feel to sustain him. even though Young's brother Joseph, a general authority, disapproved of this punishment. In July, Brigham Young wrote a reassuring letter to the bishop about this castration. "Just let the matter drop and say no more about it," the LDS president advised, "and he will soon die away among the people."
So yeah, these are some of the sources for this terrible story. Maybe next time, ask nicely.